Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: just days after promising to cut ties with Chinese partners, a former U.S. leader in self-driving trucks quietly handed sensitive data to a Chinese state-owned firm. Small businesses are suing over Trump's tariffs, saying they are hitting them hard. We get the Trump team's response and what's coming next in the trade fight. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is on his way to Singapore, aiming to strengthen U.S. partnerships in the Indo-Pacific.
We seek no conflict with anybody, including the Communist Chinese, but we will deter that.
And a massive explosion rips through a chemical plant in China, killing at least 5. The widespread destruction damaged up to 3 miles away. Too Simple, once a Chinese self-driving truck company headquartered in California, shared sensitive U.S. data with a firm owned by the Chinese Communist Party. This happened just 1 week after Too Simple promised Washington it would stop sharing sensitive technology with China. These revelations come from a new investigative report published Tuesday by the Wall Street Journal. Too Simple was a leader in developing autonomous trucks, seen as a way to address driver shortages, reduce shipping costs, and aid military logistics. In 2021, the company signed business deals with major U.S. firms, including UPS and Navistar. But behind the scenes, Too Simple was secretly sharing sensitive technical data with its Chinese partners. According to the Wall Street Journal, the data included technical designs and system specifications. Some of it involved information developed with American companies like Navistar, a leading U.S. heavy-duty truck manufacturer. Too Simple signed a national security agreement in February 2022, promising to stop sharing sensitive data within 6 months. But records show the company kept sending information during that period. A year later, Too Simple shut down its U.S. operations, but the story didn't end there. Too Simple's former co-founder has since launched a new self-driving truck startup in Texas called Bot Auto. It's staffed with former Too Simple employees and is partially backed by Chinese investors. U.S. officials have long warned that leadership in advanced tech like autonomous driving is critical to national security, especially in competition with China. In January, the U.S. Commerce Department began cracking down on foreign-made smart vehicles, citing national security concerns. Officials warned that cars imported from China and Russia could collect sensitive personal data like your location, habits, and even biometrics. The department rolled out new rules to block those vehicles from entering the market and banned Chinese companies from testing self-driving cars on American roads. Top Trump officials are pushing U.S. courts to back the president's authority to impose tariffs. They warn that if the court shut that down, it could throw off the trade deal with China, which they say is currently working in America's favor. The administration also claims blocking the tariffs could stir up old tensions between India and Pakistan, tensions they say were eased in part by Trump's trade pressure. Last Friday, the Trump administration responded to a lawsuit from small businesses challenging the tariffs. These businesses say the tariffs are hitting them hard, making it tougher to get cheap labor and materials from countries like China. Many fear tariffs will force them to raise prices, cut jobs, or even shut down. But the administration defends the tariffs as strategic, used as leverage in tough trade talks. For example, they highlight how the tariffs pressure China to lower its tariffs on U.S. goods to 10%, while the U.S. kept theirs at 30%. Officials warn that if the courts scrap the tariffs now, it could kill ongoing trade talks and give China the upper hand. Trump's team also warns this could encourage other countries to retaliate, leaving Americans vulnerable to unfair trade and even national security risks. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is on his way to Singapore. Before departing Andrews Air Force Base Wednesday morning, he stressed the importance of alliances in countering China. Here's more.
Under this administration, we will achieve peace and deterrence through strength. And that's by working by, with, and through allies and partners, specifically in the Indo-Pacific. So that's why it's been a focus of ours from the beginning. It will continue to be. We're going out to Singapore to hold a series of meetings to ensure that region understands America will be strong. We seek no conflict with anybody, including the Communist Chinese, but we will deter that. We will stand strong for our interests, and that's a big part of what this trip is all about. Look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Hegseth will deliver remarks on Saturday at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. During his time, the Defense Secretary is scheduled to meet with Singapore's Prime Minister and other senior officials. Hegseth is also expected to meet with his counterparts from Southeast Asia. Satellite imagery this month showed that China landed 2 of its most advanced bombers in the disputed Parcel Islands in the South China Sea. China claims large swaths of the region. Vietnam, the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, and others dispute those claims.
A deadly explosion has struck a chemical plant in eastern China, killing at least 5 and injuring nearly 20. Here's more.
The blast occurred just after noon yesterday, local time, at a chemical company in Shandong province. Dramatic video showed plumes of smoke and debris rising skyward as bystanders fled, some visibly wounded. Hospitals in the area are treating the injured, but Chinese state media has not yet said anything about the cause of the explosion. The actual number of casualties is hard to verify, with the Chinese regime often suppressing information about incidents like this. The blast caused widespread destruction, with one eyewitness telling local media that buildings were damaged up to 3 miles away. According to local media nearby, schools were forced to suspend classes, with some students hurt by flying glass. According to the company's website, the plant, which makes pesticides, spans over 100 acres and employs more than 300 people.
FBI Director Kash Patel says fentanyl is flooding into the U.S. from Canada. He told Fox News that hostile regimes like China, Russia, and Iran are teaming up with cartels to smuggle the drug through Vancouver right across the U.S. northern border. This comes after President Trump's push to seal the southern border with Mexico. Patel is calling on Canada to step up and do more to stop the flow. We spoke with Victor Avila, a retired special agent with ICE and Homeland Security Investigations, for insight. Victor, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, FBI head Patel noting now that the southern border is shut down. Focus is now on the north, especially when it comes to fentanyl precursors originating from China. How successful do you think singling out Canada will be in stopping the flow from China there?
Well, it's important to do so. Let me tell you why the shift is happening from the southern border of Mexico into Canada. The number one seaport where the precursors for fentanyl comes in is in the port of Hermosillo, Mexico. That's southern. On the other side, a lot of people are not aware of that port. And there's another port there called Lázaro Cárdenas. That's where the majority of the precursors come into Mexico and then obviously get smuggled into the U.S. There's a lot of attention there right now. Mexico is stepping up their enforcements, and there's a lot of seizures happening. There's a lot of movement, as you can imagine. China has had a great presence in Mexico for a long time, and so they drop off the precursors, they take the steel and lumber back in these containers, and so now they're trying to figure out how do we get and continue to get the deadly fentanyl into the United States. By the way, methamphetamine and cocaine and other drugs as well. So let's move to the northern border where there's less activity, less law enforcement presence, and that's why the Trump administration wants to focus there.
Expanding on that, official data notes that only a small fraction of the fentanyl that came into the U.S. last year originated in Canada, the vast majority still from the southern border. Some note that the northern border is relatively unmonitored and easy to cross, suggesting that the volume of fentanyl coming from there could be higher. Now, given the efforts to seal the southern border, is Canada the new place for China to park its precursors?
Not quite yet. It's the arrangements that they have in Mexico, and obviously we can't ignore the corruption there and why the precursors and the chemicals get into Mexico. But as far as the easiness of bringing it into the northern border, absolutely. I mean, it's in between the ports of entry, but especially at the ports of entry, that's where we're seeing a lot of the traffic increase right now is coming through vehicle traffic, pedestrian traffic. The cartels are resorting back to their old ways of smuggling these drugs, especially when it comes to counterfeit pills, because they could be fit almost and turn into any kind of shape or form to be smuggled into the United States. And so it is we can't ignore Canada. I know sometimes we concentrate a lot on the southern border, but we still have to concentrate on Mexico, because ultimately that's where the majority of these chemicals are being brought in, and the 100 super labs or so that the cartels have in Mexico are producing it. And then they might go around and circumvent the U.S. Or circumvent the southern U.S. border to come in through the northern border.
And zooming out a bit here, there's a big focus on tariffs, especially the higher ones on China. Well, they've been lowered from the 145%. The baseline 30% includes a tariff for China's role in the fentanyl crisis in the U.S. How successful do you see the Trump administration using tariffs to pressure the Chinese regime over its role in the fentanyl crisis?
I think it's going to be tying all this back together. It really comes down to the tariffs. Mexico is trying to do their part to show the United States, look, we're partnering with you. We're on your side. We're going to do as much as we can to limit the drugs coming into Mexico that ultimately come into the U.S. But, and it's about those tariffs. It's about the amount of imports that come into Mexico from China. Let's not forget that. And what the United States needs to do to intercept that and kind of get in there and say, listen, if we're going to put some kind of either sanctions or raise these tariffs on China and Mexico wants to avoid it, they better step up their game to keep it from coming in the region to begin with, including Central and South America, because it's not just limited to Mexico. But this is a very key point that China has a high percentage of imports coming into Mexico that ultimately will affect us. And I hate to sound like a broken record here, but Mexico has a huge role to play with. And I think President Trump is right in the middle of it to deal with both, to see how this sanction, or not sanctions, but how these tariffs are going to end up playing a major role.
Coming up, 75 of the world's poorest nations are paying Beijing $22 billion in debt this year alone. A new report says the debt wave isn't slowing down anytime soon. And Taiwan is on alert as a Chinese aircraft carrier sails through nearby waters. This comes as 3 U.S. delegations are on the island for talks on regional security. That and more here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Developing countries are set to repay China $35 billion in debt this year, with $22 billion of that coming from 75 of the world's poorest nations. That's according to a new report on Monday from the Lowy Institute, an Australian think tank. The report warns that these massive debt payments to China are expected to stay high through the end of the decade. This report comes as Peru's economy minister meets with Chinese officials to discuss a new major railway project. It's part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. China has poured billions into infrastructure projects worldwide through this program. But in return, many countries have taken on heavy debt. And if they can't pay it back, China steps in and takes control of key assets until the money is recovered. The report also highlights political strings tied to these loans. Beijing often pressures countries to back the Chinese Communist Party's One China policy. In fact, several nations in Central America, Africa, and the Pacific received major loans soon after cutting diplomatic ties with Taiwan. The report states that Beijing has gone from being a generous lender to a financial burden for many developing countries. Many are now struggling to keep up with debt payments on loans taken out over a decade ago. At the same time, China faces a tough choice: push hard to get its money back and risk breaking ties, or back off and face growing pressure to recoup its losses. Taiwan's defense ministry is keeping a close eye on a Chinese aircraft carrier moving through nearby waters. This comes as 3 separate U.S. delegations visit the island. Let's take a closer look.
Regarding China's targeted military drills and gray zone harassments, we are evaluating the levels of threat to consider whether to activate a response center or to increase our defense readiness to perform an immediate readiness drill. We will also react accordingly to safeguard national security.
A colonel in the Taiwanese Defense Ministry's intelligence department told reporters the carrier was currently in waters southeast of Taiwan. He said Taiwan was keeping it under close surveillance since it left its home port in China. The Chinese regime sends military aircraft, ships, and spy balloons near Taiwan as part of a campaign of daily harassment. It also engages in gray zone encounters that push tensions just to the brink of open conflict. There are concerns the carrier might stage military drills close to Taiwan that could be a further step toward a blockade, an act the U.S. would be required to respond to. There are 3 separate U.S. government delegations currently in Taiwan working on increasing ties.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott just signed one of the first U.S. laws targeting transnational repression, making it a crime for Beijing's agents to surveil and intimidate people in the Lone Star State. But how can local and federal law enforcement team up to fight back? NTD's Carrie Dunn spoke with retired Colonel Grant Newsham, author of When China Attacks and senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy, for his take.
Good to see you this morning, Colonel. To start with, I'd like to ask your view on Texas Governor Greg Abbott signing legislation to protect Texans from political coercion and intimidation orchestrated by foreign government agents. The law seems very much aimed at China. What's your view of this?
I think it's about time. This should be done at the national level, but it's good to see Texas taking the lead. There's also a private outfit called State Armor, which has done very good work at the state level on this issue. We cannot allow foreign countries and their agents, and we're talking about the Chinese communists mostly in this case. That's who the law is directed at. We can't allow them to come and intimidate, harass, stalk, surveil, threaten, even imprison people that they don't like, who have done something that has angered them. You cannot allow them to come into the United States and harass people and punish people and hurt people who have done really nothing that's a crime at all, and simply have come here to be free and to escape the clutches of the Chinese Communist Party. The fact that this has been allowed to go on for some years really does not speak well of America's leadership, particularly when it comes to dealing with this sort of Chinese transnational repression.
Now, the FBI's field office in Houston had been issuing warnings about this transnational repression, which some describe as something called unrestricted warfare, since January of last year. Now, this new legislation makes this crime a felony, punishable by a minimum of 15-year sentence, and calls for training so that the local law enforcement within less than a year can get trained on how to identify and deal with this type of foreign meddling in the U.S. How do you see the local and the federal law enforcement agencies working together?
Well, they should be cooperating fully on this issue if they take it seriously. The FBI is the FBI, and if it gets its reputation back, it can do some very good work and put the fear of God in some people. But at the local level, it's where you have to enforce it. This is where you find, Chinese people, and that's who we're really talking about here, who are under pressure, who have the claws of the Chinese Communist Party in them, in their relatives, threats being made to them. In some cases, the Chinese have even hired drug cartels to threaten, harm, and harass people that they're targeting. But it has to be at the local level. They have to understand that it's such a widespread problem that the FBI simply doesn't have the resources to do this. But local level can work very well. But it does take an education and also a sense, an awareness by the victims of these people that if they go to their local law enforcement, they're going to get helped. And so you have to really crack down on the people doing this, the harassment, the intimidation, crack down on them, and lengthy prison sentences for this. No tolerance at all. And if necessary, and you can usually you can find some Chinese communist official connection. Close down some consulates if necessary, but make it clear you mean business. You have to make the victims of this torment understand and believe that you can protect them. But what has been going on is beyond outrageous.
Appreciate your analysis as always, Colonel Grant Newsham. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.